Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video we're going to be reviewing Anbernic's latest handheld, the RG503. Right off the bat, I want to kind of just let everyone know that performance-wise we're not going to be winning any medals here. It's going to be quite similar to other Anbernic devices, so we are going to struggle still with Dreamcast. We're still going to struggle with Saturn. It's slightly better than both of those, but we're still not going to be able to achieve full game compatibility on those particular systems. GameCube and PS2 just aren't going to be happening here at all, so just kind of setting the expectations of what you should anticipate here. The star of the show obviously is the panel on this device. Now the panel here is the VITA OLED panel. So if you are a fan of OLEDs like I am, this is using the same panel and does offer the same striking contrast that the VITA OLED introduced a while ago. So this is a panel that I'm a big fan of. However, if you are wondering if the Mura effect would still affect this panel, the answer is yes. Now, while I don't have any video evidence to show that, on the previous firmware that I was on, I was able to replicate this rather easily. However, I've moved over to the latest retail image and that is no longer present. So it looks like Anbernic might have found a way to minimize the Mura effect while loading games, but it's still a VITA OLED panel. The Mura effect will show up eventually in some cases. However, I am such a big fan of OLED that the Mura effect isn't a big deal for me, especially while playing games. It doesn't bother me at all. Those are two things that I really wanted to talk about right in the beginning of this video, just to set expectations here. Overall, I do like this particular handheld. However, if you did own any of Anbernic's previous devices, these small quality of life upgrades are going to make you question if you really should be buying this device one way or another. Very quickly, let's go ahead and talk about the specs on the device. Anbernic is using the Rockchip 3566, which is a quad-core Cortex A55. They're currently clocked at 1.8 GHz. However, in the menu itself, there is an overclocking feature that is present. However, we can't enable anything. This remains to be seen if this will be able to enable and how far this will be able to push on the future. And we don't know how this is going to reflect with any custom OSs later developed via the scene. GPU is the Mali G52. Overall, the system is tied with 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Now, this is fine in a Linux point of view. However, I would say that this is a hard cap and we should never really expect any usable Android system to come out of this. Once again, talking about the screen, it is a 5-inch OLED panel. The resolution is a little bit wonky for the types of emulation that we're going to be running. However, we can tweak that by using scaling options so that there will be pillar boxing or letterboxing depending on whatever core is used. Additionally, Anbernic chose this time to use a 5 GHz Wi-Fi signal here, so game streaming will be possible here, although I won't be covering that in this particular review. Lastly, it does support Bluetooth 4.2, so you can actually pair other Bluetooth controllers with this device. The battery is 3500 mAh, and Anbernic claims it goes up to 6 hours. We'll be touching base on that later on. We have 2 microSD card slots, stereo speakers, and HDMI output. We're going to be covering all of that here, and we'll be touching base on a bunch of different things. Alright, up first we're going to be talking about build quality on this particular device, and there are some fit and finish issues. There are some, what looks to be some mold issues that are present and some slight warping. How it all comes together, like if we take a look at the power button, I do like that this is now recessed once again, but if we take a look at the button itself, we can see that it is slightly uneven, so the button surface is not perfectly flat with everything else, and that is partially because of this curve that's here and where the button is inside, and we're going to take a look at that. Not a huge issue, but it just looks slightly off, and we can kind of see it better here. And it's really just that the button surface is uneven to the levelness of where the cavity is. Not a huge deal, but again, just kind of a little thing like that. And right here, if we take a look at some mold issues right there, some of the how the mold came out on the plastic. Additionally, I'm not a plastics expert at all, but this particular plastic does seem to be slightly different than what Anbernic used previously. Overall, it's still fine for what it needs to be. It's rigid and durable, springs back to shape. If we take a look at how the screen mates with the plastic housing as well, there isn't perfect uniformity and we have slight lifting happening. So you can see right here that it's kind of not perfectly set with the screen itself. So there's like small little fit and finish problems. On the back we have this dimpled surface, which is nice for grip. It's pretty decent. But on the back here, especially with the sound of it, it's the type of plastic that is used here doesn't seem to be the same grade that RG552 used, but it's still fine. These screws I've already taken out here. They're on the side. These are T6 screws if you are interested. I'm going to go ahead and use this plastic tool to gain access right in the shoulder slot. When removing the case, the only thing to be mindful of is that the battery cable will be connected, so you will have to go ahead and disconnect this before fully removing it. So the battery is already glued to the back casing. Now, we aren't actually using a tremendous amount of power because this is a pretty small battery. It's a 13 watt-hour battery. It takes around 2 hours to charge if you have a full charge input, so it's 5 volt at 1.5 amps, so you can go around 7.5 watt in. This is going to charge in a little bit under 2 hours. But even using this battery, because we use so little power from the RK3566, overall there is no heat that is really generated to the back of this. So thermal wise, there isn't anything really to talk about at length. You won't feel anything thermally from this. Typically batteries do get hot if you were to pull a lot of amps out of them, but because we aren't, none of that heat will thermally radiate to the housing at all. Nothing that you'll feel. So this is the 13 watt-hour battery that Anbernic includes and is relatively lightweight for how small it is. The other thing to note here is, again, the plastics that are used are fine. If we put a bend in this, it immediately springs back to shape like that. Fairly rigid and durable, immediately springs back to shape. I'm not a plastic materials expert or anything, but the type of plastic here does indeed seem to be different than what was on the RG552, but it's overall still just fine. It springs back to shape, is durable, can take a bend, it's fine. Alright, so now we're taking a look at the business end of what's going on the 503 itself. So we do have our trigger buttons right here. Over here we can see our volume buttons. Now take a look at how that is going. You can see the buttons out here are flat and how that actually mates over here. So this is really nice. This fit and finish wise, this button is designed well. You can see how it mates with these buttons on here, so it goes with the curve of the case itself, but how it's mated is flat and uniform. Versus the button that's over here, you can see that it's flat on that button, but when in practice it's a little off. So the fit and finish on there is a little off. There does appear to be, I don't know if it's just how the case is structured, to have a little bow, but it winds up looking like some warping, but overall it's fine. Let's go ahead and take a look at the analog sticks that are here. So these are the analog sticks. Here we can see the ribbon cable for the VITA OLED where it connects to the main board. Here's the brains of the 503. It's the Rockchip 3566 as well as the 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Over here is our 5 GHz radio, which also includes Bluetooth 4.2. You can see that it has a single pole out here for the radio. So this would mean that transmit and receive will be happening exclusively on this one antenna. Here we can see the dual stereo speakers down here, the dual micro SD card slots. Here is a motor for rumble. On the top you can see USB-C for DC input. Here's our mini HDMI port for HDMI video out. Here's a 3.5mm audio jack, and then this is the USB-C on the go port, so you can connect other USB peripherals. That's pretty much the inside of it. When putting it back together, you want to make sure that these holes line up with the shoulder buttons, because this is what holds them into place. Once that's done, you can start snapping it all back together. Okay, I'm going to go over some of the system settings that are available on the retail firmware of the Anbernic RG503. What's nice here is that if you press select, you can quickly go ahead and say view Anbernic manual. Now what's nice about this is that it's literally the same manual that they give you physically in the box itself. So when we go over here, you can see system boot. So you can rest assured that you don't need that physical version, because you'll be able to quickly reference the manual directly on the device itself, which is a super nice feature that I really like. If we go over to this particular part of the manual, you can see that it's making references to a bunch of hotkeys that will be referencing the function key on the bottom of the device itself here. It can be a little bit awkward to hit the function key and something else, so you'll have to either move your left hand and hold it while you press any of these corresponding keys. One of the big ones here is going to be function and start, which is generally how you exit out of a game. So F start is how you exit. And then you have save and load, fast forward, and show FPS. So these are pretty kind of straightforward, but you're going to be going through them one by one. So you're going to be doing function. L1 is load. So L for load, and then R, which is not S but is not L, for save. So That's a quick tip just to remember which was load or save. It also gives you PSP and Nintendo DS because these are going to be running something different than RetroArch. This is going to be RetroArch type of stuff that we're going to be hitting. And then you can do the function B, which will get you to RetroArch functions itself. Another thing that we're going to be doing, and things that I recommend. So if you go ahead and click Start, you're going to go down to Sound Settings. Now by default, your front end music will be on. And this is pretty loud and obnoxious. The speakers are really loud, so I'm not really a big fan of this, so I go ahead and recommend turning that off. I don't really like having just a giant menu music playing at any particular given moment. Additionally, in game setting, the one thing that I do recommend here is that if we go to game ratio, that you set it to core provided, it'll be default by auto, and that's going to stretch the game out to use the entire panel. You may want this because for whatever reason, if you're afraid of OLED burn-in or whatever, you may want to draw the entire thing. For me, I actually prefer when it says core provided, it's going to scale out but keep it to the aspect ratio of the game itself. GBA still looks relatively well, even on the kind of odd resolution that the VITA OLED has, which we'll be going over and demoing soon. For all the game demos, I will be doing core provided. Those are the two big tips that I really recommend. We're going to go ahead and jump into KODI Media Center, and we're going to show some of the interesting features of the system as well. So this KODI is already built into the retail firmware image, and we're going to load up into KODI. For anyone that remembers old XBMC, that's what pretty much the updated interface looks like. I'm going to go ahead and go into No Label, which is the second micro SD card slot. The other one, which is Games, is actually the first SD card slot, but I installed Video here. I created a directory called _video just so it would be at the top. And then we can go here and just take a look at some types of stuff that is able to be played. So this is Matryoshka format. Now you can control volume with the right analog stick. So if we just push down there, you can see that volume will go away if we go up a little bit. So all the things that were from like XBMC, so just hitting like right will kind of jump in front, up will jump further ahead, up will jump further ahead again. So you can see that you can press up or down to skip largely ahead from the video, or just a little bit at a time using the left and right on the D-pad. And then you can use the analog stick itself for volume.
Big fat brain that misses eating all them big fat problems. Focus on the good things, trust me.
So this is really, really nice. Actually, on the VITA OLED panel, you can see that the colors that my camera is picking up are slightly different. For what it's worth, it looks sensational on the device itself. This is Matryoshka format. It is 1080p. It is H.264 that it is encoded as, and it plays just fine. If we go back, I have a bunch of other stuff. I have Vorbis here, and we can see that that's going to be playing just fine as well.
Click of the mouse. DeFrisco says the biggest advantage with Geos is the high quality.
Now, one thing to make note of here is that HDMI out will work. However, you need to reboot the entire system when you have HDMI. So you will be pressing the reset button when you connect the HDMI into a TV. Once you reset it, it'll then start piping out all the video out via this. Likewise, if you're already playing video on a TV, you can't just pull out the HDMI cable and then it will automatically start pumping to the display on the device itself. It will need to be reset once again. This might be a limitation of the retail firmware, and we'll get worked out later on. It's not a huge big deal, but it's just something that you should be aware of, that that's a thing that's there. Now, how I feel about HDMI out, you can use Bluetooth controllers as well on this device, so you could ostensibly have this device where you would HDMI out to a TV and then connect Bluetooth controllers and use this as an ad hoc retro emulation machine. For what it's worth, I don't see that being used very much in my particular case. All of my kids have phones or iPads, so they typically don't really care. Like, if you think about this for travel purposes, if you're going to buy a mini HDMI cable, not micro HDMI, mini HDMI, and use this so that you could take this out with you to different, like when you're going traveling, plugging into whatever TV is available in your hotel or whatever. So this is a feature that is neat, but I don't know. It's cool. I like that you can get video playback on the OLED panel itself. It is exceptionally nice. This isn't something that is for me. I am not a multi-device person. I don't like carrying around multi-devices to, kind of piggyback on a bunch of different things. I am an all-in-one type of person. I don't like carrying a backpack. So this feature might be for you, but for me, it really isn't for me. So that's KODI, and it is cool that it works, and it just works just fine. Additionally, it's all kind of piped in really nice. So if we go to the power button right here, you can see it says exit to Anbernic, which is the nice little flare that it actually calls that it's what it's being used on the device itself. So KODI Media Player does work on there, and that's pretty much an overview of the systems on there. Now we're going to be touching base on battery life itself. What I've recorded is 8.5 hours of battery life. Frame rate rise on Burning Rangers, it is pushing the system to the max, and then on NeoGeo we aren't really using it to the max, but both together we're actually able to achieve from 100% down to 0%, 8.5 hours of battery life. That is really good. If we talk about standby time is also excellent on the device itself. So it works as you would expect. You would just hit the power button, it would push the machine into standby. You would still see the green light is active, but then if you press standby, the power button again, it would wake the machine. I did a 13-hour test and I only used up 1% of the battery, so standby life seems to be fantastic. Charging time will take a little bit under 2 hours, but if you just have 5 watt, it's going to be like 2.5 hours of charge. So your charging time will be either a little bit under 2 or a little bit over 2, but generally it's around 2 hours to fully charge from 0% to 100%. Overall battery life on this is what I would consider A+ grade. It is exceptional with regard to how long the battery lasts, how good standby time is, and how decent charging time is. So again, the D-pad, while it's not the best, what I have found is that overall it's actually really good. And this is kind of similar to all Anbernic D-pads. Now the thing about the D-pad on the Anbernic is, like, even if I'm trying to whip out Dragon Punches, there is a layer there where you kind of have to sense how the buttons are being pressed underneath. It is tactile enough that you can feel it, like you can understand where that button is being pressed. So it's not so much that how the feel of it is going to be exactly how it's being pressed, if so to speak, is that you have to kind of gauge it based on practice. So you have to know exactly where you're going to be hitting it, right? But it's easy enough to finesse the control to do exactly what you're looking to do. Right? So the D-pad and face buttons, them being the dominant position and kind of having these analog sticks on the back, overall is, fine, especially with the types of games that we're going to be emulating here. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And then if we take a look at the shoulder buttons, again, these shoulder buttons are things that I would prefer to be stacked instead of inline, but with how you're going to be hitting them, you're going to be hitting them with the kind of the fat of your index fingers here to hit L1 and R1, and then L2 and R2 you're going to be using the tips of your index fingers to hit those. Overall, it's not a terrible design. I would prefer stacked on the shoulders themselves, but the D-pad is really good. The face buttons are excellent, have really good crisp feedback. The D-pad is also really good, and the only thing that I would say here is that it does require you to understand where it's being pressed, and you can sense where it's being pressed underneath. Overall, it's very good. At this point, we're going to go ahead and jump into game demos, and then we're going to take a look at total input and latency, and then we're going to go to the conclusion of this video.
Nowhere if you don't pass this class.
Alright, this last bit here is total input latency, and this is really just a verification check that there's nothing odd going on with the VITA OLED. Everything is pretty much in line. Again, this is Super Nintendo emulation. This is stock settings. I am not using run ahead here. I am recording off of 480 FPS video. The biggest takeaway here is that I could misjudge when I pressed the button, so there could be a frame delay. We see an update on the display at 25 frames, and that basically means that total input latency is around 50 milliseconds, plus or minus a frame there. So all in all, there's nothing weird going on with the VITA OLED panel. Everything is looking up. This is really good total input latency. Alright, now for the conclusion of my review on the RG503. Overall, it's a worthwhile device, but if you have any of the previous Anbernic devices, I could understand why you would have some reason for not wanting to get this particular device. I mean, the only thing that is standout feature here is the VITA OLED. The Rockchip 3566 as an SoC isn't a particular chip that gives us enough performance difference from the previous generations that we're getting anything of a sizable uplift in performance. So we still have Saturn, Dreamcast, and PSP still being systems where we won't achieve full frame rate across every game. There will be some games that are just not playable, like Burning Rangers on Saturn, like God of War in PSP. There are going to be games that just don't work as well. So there are going to be games that do work on those systems, but you're going to have to pick and choose and see where they are. Overall, I've taken a look at the price of it. It's affordable for a handheld, but I can understand that people might have some misgivings with regard to the performance. Overall, I think the D-pad and face buttons are excellent in quality. Battery life is sensational. Charging is really good. Standby time is really good. It's a really good overall product, but there are some things here that I could understand why people were looking for like next generation performance wise, and this is not really going to cut it. It does have a lot of good quality of life features like the VITA OLED, like the D-pad, like the KODI media player, HDMI out. There's a lot to like here. That's pretty much going to be my look at Anbernic RG503. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.